Hi everyone, I figured I'd make a video to show you how to use Google Sheets to help us with our graphing. Um, I have to apologize to you. The link I gave you guys for our first lab is really no good. I apologize if you've already started to use that website for some graphs. Turns out it's not going to work at all. It doesn't space your x-axis properly, and to be honest, the website looks, or rather, it's formatted very strangely in the first place. Um, so do yourself a favor if you haven't already, just scroll down to the number one of your questions in this lab and just delete that link. It's not going to serve us whatsoever. Fortunately, we can simply use Google Sheets to input our data, and Google Sheets will make nice graphs for us. And of course, since it's Google compatible, we'll be able to just throw the graph itself into our lab document. So everything's all in one place. No need for separate files or pictures or anything like that. So let me bring you down to a data set, uh, similar to the one we took in class today. Now, I just made these numbers up. These aren't from any classes that we took our measurements with today. I just kind of made these up off the top of my head just for an example. However, these numbers are realistic, so it's not like my data set will give us any, bad looking graphs. I know, some estimates for some of these circular shaped objects, so I just, put them in there. But let me show you what we'll need to do. Before we go over to Google Sheets, what Google Sheets is going to do with any data you give it is it's going to make a graph in the order you give it the data. So before I even think about how to give Google Sheets this data, is I want to look to see what graphs I actually am interested in. So looking back to the first question, which is the one where I ask you to make these graphs, uh, we're making two graphs in total. One graph is diameter versus mass, with diameter on the x-axis and mass on the y. And the other graph is diameter, again on the x-axis, versus now circumference on the y. So diameter is the data I will be focusing on, since that's my x-axis in both graphs, and that's the axis I want to be increasing when I feed the data to Google Sheets. What Google Sheets will do, again, is give you the order, give you the data in the graph in the order you give it. So if I give it a data point that is towards the beginning of my data, and then a data point towards the end, and then one in the middle, it's going to take your line and kind of sweep it around. That's not what we want. We want, if there is a relationship between these measurements, we want to have a nice continuous line of some sort. So what I'm going to do first before I jump into Google Sheets is just give myself some extra rows in this data chart so I can easily organize this data and keep everything together. So we have 5 sets of data. What I'm doing now is right clicking and I'm inserting rows below my existing data set just so I've got plenty of room to organize this data in the correct order, or rather the one that I want. So I'm just inserting 5 rows below so I can copy my existing data and reorganize it. Again, I'm focusing on the diameter for my x-axis. So I'm going to take my diameter and organize it in increasing order. So my ring is the smallest diameter. So I'm going to highlight the row and hit Control C for copy. Or of course, you can just right click and select copy up here. And I'm going to paste that whole row right here in the first row that I made. Bottle is my, or rather, bottle cap is my second diameter. So I'll put that next. And so on and so forth until I have all the data in the proper order, increasing with respect to diameter. So I'll just do that. If you give me another second or two. My vinyl record's my biggest diameter, so that goes last. And I've got all my data reorganized. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete these first 5 rows. I don't need them anymore. I have the data in increasing order with respect to diameter now, so highlight them all and delete those rows. Okay, so now here's my data, same data, but organized appropriately. Now I'm ready for the spreadsheet. I'm going to open up a new tab, go to my Google Apps menu. Sorry, I think I lost you once I switched tabs. Here I am again. Um, Here's my Google Apps icon. I'm going to select Sheets. You may have to scroll down to find it if you haven't opened up Sheets very much, but here it is for me. So this is going to open up a blank Google Sheets for me. It's always the default option, blank. So here's a blank spreadsheet, a bunch of cells, just like Microsoft Excel. I'm going to go back to my lab data, and I'm just going to highlight everything to copy it. So I've highlighted all my cells. I'm hitting Control C to copy, or again, you could always right click and click copy if that's what you prefer. Here we are going back to my spreadsheet, and I'm just going to paste all this data in there. So I just hit Control V on my keyboard to make all the data populate, and it should go ahead in just a moment. I don't think my Chromebook likes me with the webcam and also trying to input data at the same time, but there it is. So all my data is there in the same way I had it in my document. Now I just need to tell spreadsheets, to, Google Sheets rather, to make a graph out of this data. So here's how we do that. I'm going to quickly look back to my graph and say, okay, one of my graphs is diameter versus circumference. So that's fine. I will take a look over here. I've got diameter and circumference right next to each other. So let me just highlight these two columns for now. Once I've got only these numbers highlighted, I can click Insert Chart, or I could even click the little chart picture over here. Make sure that your data is only numbers. If you throw CMs or lowercase g's to indicate the units, centimeters and grams, Google Sheets will not know what to do with that because it's only looking for number information. So go ahead and delete any letters you may have in these cells. But again, the command is Insert Chart. Depending on how often you start using Google Sheets for making graphs, Google will start to remember some of the graphs you make. So since I've done a couple of practice rounds before making this video, Google is going to suggest line graphs for me, I think. Or actually, it's suggesting a scatter chart. But that's not what we want. It opens up a menu on the side, the chart editor. After we see our picture of our graph pop up, I'm going to go down to the dropdown and tell it that I want a line graph. Now, again, I've got some suggestions by Google here, but I'm just going to scroll down to the line section and I'll select the smooth line chart. So I've got a nice looking graph here. I know a lot of you guys ran into issues when we were in class today, and I know what the issues are now. Let me move myself to this side so you can see everything in the menu. So looking at the setup half of our chart editor, we have an x-axis and a series. The series is also known as the y-axis. If our x-axis has multiple rows of data, that's what's going to give us multiple lines. Right now, I have one series of data in my x-axis. For me, let me move my chart over so we can see everything. For me, my x-axis data is coming from cells B3 through B7. That is where my x-axis data is for where I pasted it in my Google Sheets. If you have more than one row here, only allow for the cells that represent your x-axis to populate this x-axis. So you can just hit the dots and remove or add rows if necessary, but you just want to select these cells for the x-axis. For my series, again, I'll just click over here as if I was adding one. I would only select these cells and make that my y-axis or series. Sorry, let me right-click the graph and open that up again so we can see the menus. I clicked away, so I lost my menu for a moment. But this is what I would look for if I'm making a graph in Google Sheets, that the x-axis and the series have their cells appropriately labeled. So for me, again, I'm looking for cell C3 through C7 for my y-axis, and I'm looking for cell B3 through B7 for my x-axis. So that's the adjustment that a lot of us needed to make, and I wasn't aware that that was how it worked earlier in class today, but hopefully this solves the biggest problem we had. But don't click away yet. There's still plenty of work we have to do with this graph before we can throw it into our lab document. I already have a bunch of detail here because, again, Google remembered the last entries I made. You guys won't have any titles, but let me show you how to put those in. It's very easy. I'm going to click over to the Customize half of our chart editor. And we have different options to change colors. We can change the lines. What we really want to do is click the chart and axis titles part of the menu. And you see here for the chart title, I put circumference versus diameter. So that appeared at the top of my graph here. Going back down to the drop down, I can change this to the horizontal axis title. I made that diameter centimeters. And then going back to the title selector, vertical axis, I made that circumference. So we can close this menu for now. There are other options you have. One I want to point out is the series menu. Now we can change the color of our line. I'm just going to leave it blue. We can change our line to dotted or dashed if you want. I'm just going to leave it solid. But something that you might want to do is go to your point size. See, we have none by default. But if I go ahead and make point size bigger, let me give it like a 7 point, it'll take the actual dots that represent your data and enlarge them so they're actually visible. I think this is a good thing to do so we actually see the 5 points of data that came directly from our measurements rather than just looking at the line that's kind of created from all of them. You can also change the thickness of your line and the actual shape that your data points take, but I think the defaults are fine. But you are welcome to edit them if you choose. There are plenty more menus here. Grid lines and ticks, for example, will allow you to kind of have more background lines behind your line in your graph. So again, well, it says right here, grid lines. So if I click open, say, the minor grid lines, it's tough to see perhaps through this video, but I've got more lines going across the background of the graph just so it's easier to see the intervals. Again, these things aren't necessarily, rather they're not necessary, but it might make your graph look a little bit nicer. But what I've shown you so far is everything that we absolutely have to do is label the axes and the title of the graph, maybe make the dots appear as well. All right, so this is the circumference versus diameter graph, and it looks fairly good with a straight line, or straight enough. One thing we still need to do, though, is have Google Sheets help us calculate the slope of this line, which is a combination of all 5 of our points. And I'll show you how to do that with just using the keyboard rather than clicking around. I'm going to go ahead and just select any empty cell. How about this one? And I'm going to tell Google Sheets to perform this operation. I'm going to hit the equal sign. And then I'm going to type out the word slope. And Google is already asking, or rather it's confirming and telling me that it's ready to calculate the slope of a line from a set of data. So I say, okay, let me tell you which data I'm interested in right now. You open up a parentheses, and just by me clicking the open parentheses button, Google says, okay, I'm ready for the Y set of your data. Remember, of course, when we are looking for the slope of a graph, we're taking some changing measurement in a y-axis and dividing out some changing measurement in an x-axis. So we need to give Google Sheets the y-axis data first. So I'm doing my circumference versus diameter. So my y-axis right now is this set of data. So you can see here that Google said, okay, I'm taking data from cell C3 through C7 right here. Now I hit comma, and now it's ready for data set X. Again, the menu pops up and it's telling me that's what it's expecting. So now I'm going to highlight for me, cell B2 through B7. And again, it confirms that. Now I can close out the parentheses and hit enter, and the program will do a slope calculation. Now again, the slope that I have here looks to be about 3.1473. I can keep reading the decimals, but there's an approximate value. Now, again, I said before that I made up all my values, but I know what we should be expecting. So maybe this number rings a bell with a lot of you, and that's only if you didn't know which number we should expect with the relationship between circumference and diameter of circles. But there it is. Hopefully your slope is somewhere close to what I'm getting. But if not, I mean, it is what it is. It is what your data says. And again, I expect there to be some sort of relationship between these values because I'm looking at a nice, linear graph or straight enough. When I am ready to do my diameter versus mass graph, because of course we need to do all this again for that graph, I can just really take a glance at this data. It's already ordered in increasing values for diameter, and so are the circumference values, it seems, hence our linear graph. But when I look at mass, I'm going 5.3, 0.8, 9.4, 64, 17. There's no clear pattern to these numbers. I may not expect to see a nice line graph from this data set. In fact, if it's very clear there's no relationship, no mathematical relationship between diameter and mass, maybe it's not even worth taking a slope calculation. But let me show you guys one last step before I close the video out. Don't forget, we want to actually take our graph, and I'm just going to hit Control-C to copy it. And since it's a Google image, I'm just going to go to my lab document again. And I'm going to paste the I'm going to paste the image of the lab right into my lab document. Now, when I do so, it asks me if I want to link to a spreadsheet or if I want to just paste the image unlinked. I'm going to select Paste Unlinked, so it just appears as an image right there in my lab. Sorry if I lost you guys. Sometimes when I switch tabs, I lose the webcam, but hopefully this video helps you guys with all the graphing we'll be doing this year. Of course, we can talk about this some more in our virtual class on Wednesday, but hopefully this video will clear up any doubts you may have had about using some online program to make our graphs. Google Sheets seems to be the one that'll do the job. Hopefully you guys have no problems from now on, but obviously feel free to ask if you need my help. All right, well, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care until then.